At my wife's funeral, while I was still trying to remember how to breathe, I overheard my daughter-in-law whisper something to my son. She was wearing a bright blue dress, a splash of color in a sea of black, and her voice was laced with triumph. "This day feels like a holiday," she said. "Everything is about to change." They thought my grief had made me weak. They thought the house, the savings, everything my wife Eleanor and I had built was now theirs for the taking. They didn't know when my wife had left me one final gift. Not a check, not a property. She left me a plan, and as they celebrated their coming inheritance, I began to set the pieces in motion. They thought the funeral was an ending. They had no idea it was the beginning of theirs. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe a person's life work deserves respect. The funeral felt like a performance I hadn't rehearsed for. I stood near the entrance of the church, in a suit that suddenly felt too big, shaking hands with people whose names evaporated the moment they said them. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the polite, hollow sound of sympathy. I am Arthur, 70 years old, and for the first time in 45 years, I was navigating the world alone. Eleanor was the architect of our lives. I was just the builder who followed her plans. Without her, the blueprints felt like a foreign language. My son Leo stood beside me, looking the part of the grieving son. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit, his face a mask of solemn duty. But I saw him check his watch twice during the eulogy. His wife Brenda was a masterpiece of performative grief. She dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief and held Leo's arm with a grip that looked more like ownership than comfort. Her cobalt blue dress was a wound in the fabric of the day. While I was accepting a condolence from an old neighbor, I saw Brenda slip a business card to one of Leo's colleagues. Even here in the house of God, she was closing a deal. Later at my home, the house felt cavernous, filled with the low murmur of guests eating finger sandwiches from platters I didn't remember ordering. I stood in the kitchen, my kitchen staring out the window at the garden Eleanor had spent 30 years coaxing from the stubborn Texas clay. Every rose bush, every stone in the path was a testament to her patience. That was when I heard them. They were standing in the dining room near the grandfather clock that had been my father's. They thought the hum of the crowd would cover their words. I heard Brenda's voice, a low, triumphant whisper. "I know it's terrible to say, but this day feels like a holiday. Everything is about to change." My hand tightened around the coffee cup I was holding. The ceramic felt brittle, like it might shatter. Leo murmured something I couldn't hear, but his tone was compliant. My son, the 42-year-old man I had taught to ride a bike and, to be honest, was agreeing with her. The grief in my chest, a vast, hollow space, began to harden. It turned into something else, something cold and heavy as steel. I didn't confront them. I didn't let the mask slip. I let them believe I hadn't heard. I let them see exactly what they expected to see, a broken old man lost in his sorrow. That evening, after the last of the guests had offered their final useless comforts and left the three of us sat in the living room. The platters of half-eaten food sat on the coffee table like an accusation. The house was finally quiet, but the silence was heavy with unspoken things. Brenda broke it first, her voice a careful blend of sympathy and strategy. "Dad," she said, using the name like a key to a lock she intended to pick. "Leo and I have been talking. We're worried about you here, all alone in this big house." I looked at her. Her face was a study in practiced concern. Leo shifted beside her, picking up his cue. "It's just not practical, Dad. The upkeep, the property taxes, it's a burden. We think it's time to start thinking about the next steps." Next steps. Eleanor had been in the ground for less than 8 hours. My side of the bed was still cold, but they were already on the next steps. "We think you should sell," Brenda said, her voice smooth as polished marble. "We've actually been looking at some lovely communities for you, gated with amenities. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. Your mother and I paid this house off a decade ago," I said, my voice flat. "There are no mortgage payments. The taxes are manageable." I had never told them the house was free and clear. I had let them assume we still carried debt because I had seen the way they looked at our life like a balance sheet they were constantly auditing. Leo waved a dismissive hand. "That's not the point. The point is simplifying your life, freeing up your assets so you can be comfortable." "My assets are fine," I said, "and I am comfortable here." "For now," Brenda said quickly. "But we have to be realistic. We can't just wait until something happens." "Until something happens to you." The words echoed what Mark, my other son, had said after his mother's funeral. It seemed to be a popular family sentiment. I looked at their faces, so full of reason, so empty of empathy. They had rehearsed this. They had sat in their minimalist condo drinking imported coffee and planned the dismantling of my life as if it were a corporate merger. They saw a house to be liquidated, an asset to be managed, and an old man who was the primary obstacle to their plans. I stood up. My knees ached, but I didn't let it show. "I appreciate your concern." I said the words tasting like rust. "But I'm tired. I'd like to get some sleep." I didn't wait for their response. I walked out of the living room, down the hall, and into my bedroom. I closed the door behind me, the soft click of the latch sounding like a final, definitive statement. They saw a grieving old man, an obstacle to be managed. They had no idea they were looking at the man who had laid the foundation of the very ground they stood on. And I knew how to bring a house down stone by stone if I had to. The war had begun. They just didn't know I had already been given the battle plan. The days that followed the funeral were quiet, but it was a heavy, suffocating quiet. The kind that presses in on you when the world expects you to be one thing and your heart is another. My life became a calendar of their concern. On Monday, Leo called. His voice was smooth, casual, the one he used for clients he was trying to put at ease. "Just checking in, Dad, seeing how you're holding up." Then after a perfectly timed pause, "By the way, Jim from the office, his father just moved into the Willows over in Hill Country. Says the golf simulator is state-of-the-art. Sounds like a resort." He wasn't suggesting he was planting a seed. On Tuesday, a text message from Brenda. No words, just a link to an online article. The headline read, "The Joy of Downsizing, Finding Freedom in Your Golden Years." I stared at it on my phone screen, the blue hyperlink glowing like a small, cold fire. It was a perfectly passive move, plausible deniability wrapped around a command. Eleanor would have seen right through it. She was a math teacher, but she taught more than algebra. She taught patterns. She saw them in numbers in nature, and most of all, in people. "People are just equations, Arthur," she used to say, smiling over her reading glasses. "You just have to find the variable they're trying to hide." On Wednesday, Brenda called herself. Her voice was bright, full of manufactured excitement. "Arthur, you'll never guess what I found. A new community, the Pinnacle. It's not a retirement home, it's a lifestyle residence. On-site clinic, a bistro, even a movie theater." She presented it like a treasure she had unearthed just for me. They were building a cage around me bar by bar and calling it a nest. Every just checking in was a test of my defenses. Every helpful link was another bar slid into place. They thought my grief had made me deaf and blind. But Eleanor had taught me to see the math behind the words, and the equation they were solving was simple. My house plus my grief equaled their opportunity. They thought they were being subtle, but all I could see was the solution they were working towards, and the only variable left to remove was me. I couldn't stand the emptiness of the living room any longer. Every chair, every lamp seemed to hold the shape of her absence. I found myself in her study, the one room that still felt entirely like her. It smelled of lemon oil polish and old books. Her desk was neat, a pen resting beside a half-finished crossword puzzle. I ran my hand over the back of her chair, the leather worn smooth from years of her sitting there managing our world on paper. I did it to feel close to her, to borrow some of her strength. The bottom drawer on the left had always been stiff. I had to jiggle it just right. When it finally slid open with a soft groan, I saw the usual things inside: old tax documents, warranties for appliances we no longer owned. But underneath them, tucked in the back, was a heavy manila envelope I had never seen before. It felt cool to the touch. Taped to the front was a smaller sealed envelope with a single word written in her elegant square handwriting: Arthur. Beside it, a single strange-looking brass key was held in place by a strip of yellowing tape. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal on the letter. The paper inside was crisp. Her voice rose from the page so clear I could almost hear her speaking in the quiet room. My Arthur, she wrote. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and I am so sorry for the silence I have left you in. But I fear our children will try to fill that silence with noise, with plans that are not yours. They love you, but their love has become tangled with ambition. They will see your grief as an opportunity. I have not left you defenseless. For the last 5 years, I have been preparing for this day. The key is to a safe deposit box at City Central Bank on the corner of 5th and Elm. The man you need to speak to is David Chen. He is my lawyer. He knows everything. Do not let them make you small, my love. Our life was not small. Fight for it. Not with anger, but with the quiet, unarguable truth of numbers and paper. I have left you a full set of tools. Use them. I read the letter 3 times. The grief was still there, a hole in the center of my life. But it was no longer a void. It was an anchor point. Eleanor had just left me memories. She had left me a map. I held the cold brass key in my palm, its sharp edges pressing into my skin. The weight of it felt like a promise. For the first time since I lost her, I knew which way to walk. The City Central Bank building was a cold block of granite and glass, a place that didn't care about grief. The air inside the vault was chilled and still smelling of metal and old paper. The teller, a young woman with practiced politeness, used 2 keys to open the safe deposit box. She slid the long metal drawer out and left me alone in the small private room. The box contained only one thing, a thick blue legal folder. I carried it out of the bank like a man carrying a piece of a life he wasn't sure was his. David Chen's office was on the 17th floor, with a view of the Austin skyline that made the city look organized and calm. He was a man in his late 50s, sharp and composed, with eyes that seemed to see the structure beneath the surface of things. He stood when I entered. "Mr. Hale," he said, his handshake firm. "Arthur, please." He nodded. "Arthur, your wife was one of the most brilliant women I have ever had the privilege of representing. She was always 5 moves ahead." I sat across from his wide, uncluttered desk and placed the blue folder between us. Her letter mentioned a plan. "It's more than a plan, Arthur," Chen said, leaning forward. "It's a fortress. For the past 5 years, Eleanor worked with me to restructure the majority of your liquid assets. Stocks, bonds, the money from the sale of her family's land. It was all consolidated and moved. Moved where? I asked, my heart starting a slow, heavy rhythm. Into the Hale Family Legacy Trust, he said, sliding a document from the folder. It was thick, bound in blue with our names embossed in gold. On paper, the trust benefits the family. In practice, it has one gatekeeper, you. He let that sink in. You are not just the primary beneficiary, Arthur. You are the sole executor and trustee. Nothing gets distributed, nothing is sold, nothing moves without your signature. He tapped the page. She gave you the keys, all of them. I stared at the document, the dense legal text blurring. But the children, Leo and Brenda, their inheritance. That, Chen said, his voice lowering slightly, is the heart of it. Eleanor included a provision, a very specific one. We privately called it the morality clause. He turned to a page marked with a yellow tab and pushed the folder toward me. I read the words and the air left my lungs. Their inheritance, it stated, was provisional. It was entirely dependent upon their conduct toward me in the 12 months following her death. I looked up at Chen, my eyes asking the question my mouth couldn't form. It legally requires you to be the sole judge of that conduct, he explained. The trust document empowers you to keep a detailed, dated log of all significant interactions. Phone calls, visits, discussions about the house requests for money. At the end of 1 year, you will present that log to me. Based on the evidence you provide, you have the full legal authority to modify their share of the trust. You can delay it. You can reduce it. Or if the violations are severe enough, you can eliminate their inheritance entirely. I leaned back, my head spinning. Eliminate it, every dollar, Chen confirmed. If their share is eliminated, the funds are automatically redirected to a charitable foundation Eleanor established in her name. He paused, letting me absorb the sheer, brilliant weight of it. She knew Arthur. She saw this coming. She saw their impatience. She refused to let them turn her death into a payday. I looked down at my hands, the hands of a builder, calloused and worn. All these years, I thought I was the one protecting our family. But it had been her. Always her. Quietly, meticulously, she had built this. Not a wall to keep them out, but a room with one door. And she had just handed me the only key. I walked out of that office and into the cold Austin air, not as a victim, but as an executor. Leo and Brenda had started a game without knowing the rules. Eleanor had just handed me the rule book, and I was going to make sure they learned every single page. The war began not with a shout, but with a throw pillow. Brenda arrived the following Tuesday with 2 large shopping bags from one of those expensive stores where everything is a shade of beige. The living room just felt so heavy, Dad, she said, her voice dripping with manufactured sympathy. It needs a little light, a fresh start. Before I could answer, she was swapping out the needlepoint pillows Eleanor had spent a winter making, replacing their rich colors with sterile, lifeless squares of linen. I said nothing. I just nodded, a sad, slow nod I was learning to perfect. Whatever you think is best, dear. That night, after she and Leo had gone home, I took out my phone. I took a picture of the alien pillows sitting on my couch. I opened a new note on my phone, a digital ledger, and wrote my first entry. March 25th. Brenda replaced Eleanor's pillows, stated the room felt heavy. Every act of aggression she would label as an act of care, and I would document the translation. 2 days later, it was the kitchen. She arrived with a label maker and a set of matching glass canisters. It's just about efficiency, Arthur, she said, as she emptied the mismatched bags of flour and sugar my wife and I had used for decades. She threw out a jar of cinnamon sticks Eleanor had loved, claiming they were past their prime. She worked with a focused, cheerful energy, a colonizer disguised as a helper. I watched from the doorway, my face a mask of weary acceptance. That evening, another photo was added to my phone. Another entry in the log. March 27th. Pantry reorganized without asking. Comment about efficiency. Eleanor's spice rack is now in a donation box in the garage. They thought they were winning. They saw my silence as surrender. They didn't understand that my silence was ammunition. I had to become a ghost in my own home. I learned to look confused when my mind was sharp as a razor. I learned to nod when I wanted to shout. Every passive agreement was a piece of evidence. Every sad smile was a signature on a deposition they didn't know they were giving. The brochures appeared the next week. She left them on the coffee table, fanned out like magazines. Oak Ridge Senior Villas, the pinnacle at Barton Creek. Glossy photos of white-haired couples playing chess and laughing in a swimming pool. I pretended not to see them for a full day. When I finally picked one up, I made sure she was watching from the kitchen. I squinted at the page, my hand trembling just slightly. She didn't say a word. She just smiled, a flicker of triumph in her eyes, before turning back to the sink. The log entry that night was precise. March 29th, Brenda left brochures for 2 assisted living facilities on the coffee table. Implied it was a casual thought. The final straw came on a Friday afternoon. I walked into the living room and found her dusting the mantel. The large silver-framed photograph of Eleanor and me on our 40th anniversary, the one where we're laughing so hard my eyes are closed, was gone. It was sitting on a side table face down. "The frame was so dated, Arthur," she said, not even turning around. "And the picture is a little faded. We should find a brighter, more recent one of you." I stood there, my hands clenched into fists in my pockets. She had begun to erase my wife. I looked at the empty space on the mantel, then at the back of her head. I said nothing. I just nodded. I let her believe she had won the wall. But the entry in my log that night was written in cold, hard, capital letters. April 1st. She removed the photograph. "This is no longer about a house. This is about memory. And mine." It turns out is perfect. I was in the garden, my hands deep in the soil around Eleanor's prize-winning roses, when the sound of an expensive engine interrupted the afternoon quiet. A black sedan I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. Leo got out of the passenger side wearing a suit I knew I'd paid for, even if I couldn't remember the occasion. The man who got out of the driver's side was all polished shoes and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dad," Leo called, walking across the lawn like he was stepping onto a stage. "This is Greg. He's with Austin Luxury Properties. He was just in the neighborhood, and I wanted him to see the place." The lie was so thin it was transparent. Greg shook my hand with a grip that was meant to convey confidence but only felt like pressure. "A real pleasure, Arthur," he said, his eyes already scanning the house, the porch, the shoreline. "Leo's told me so much about this gem. They just don't build them like this anymore." He spoke about my home as if it were already a listing. I played my part. I let my shoulders slump. I rubbed the back of my neck. "Leo, son, you should have called. The place is a mess." "It looks great, Dad," Leo said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Greg just wants a quick look around, for an appraisal, just to know what we're working with." I followed them inside, a reluctant ghost in my own home. Greg walked through the rooms with an air of professional assessment, making comments about good bones and excellent natural light. He was selling my life back to me in marketable terms. My phone was on the kitchen counter, screen down. The recording app I had installed was silently capturing every word, every reasonable-sounding lie, every gentle, coercive push. After Greg had completed his tour and left with a promise to run the numbers and get back to you, Leo cornered me in the living room. He was beaming, energized by the performance. "See, Dad. Greg thinks we could get an incredible price. The market is hot, but to move on an offer, we need to be able to act fast." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sheaf of papers clipped together. He laid them on the coffee table. The title at the top was unmistakable: Durable Power of Attorney. "This just makes it easier for me to handle the paperwork," he said, his voice a smooth river of reason. "Signing contracts, talking to the bank. You won't have to deal with any of the headaches. It's for your own good. To protect you." I picked up the document. I let my hand shake just a little. "My goodness, Leo, that's a lot of legal words. My eyes aren't what they used to be." I squinted at the first page. A power of attorney. That sounds so final. Eleanor always handled these things. I'm not sure I understand it all. "It's standard procedure, Dad," he said, his patience thinning just enough for me to see the steel beneath it. "It's just a tool to help me manage things for you." I put the papers back down on the table, careful not to look at him directly. Let me hold on to it for a day or two," I said, my voice soft and tired. "I need to read it when my head is clearer. It's been a long day. I'll look it over later." He hesitated, then his face relaxed into a patronizing smile. He saw a confused old man, overwhelmed and pliable. "Of course, Dad, take your time. Just don't take too long. An opportunity like this won't last forever." He squeezed my shoulder and left, confident he had moved his piece forward on the board. I watched his car disappear down the street. Then I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the document. He thought he was handing me a leash. He had no idea he'd just handed me a noose. His own. The old floorboard in the hallway had been groaning for a year. It was the perfect excuse. I called my old friend Sal, who I'd worked with for 20 years on a dozen construction sites. He knew my house better than Leo did. He understood foundations. When he arrived on Thursday, he carried a small, heavy toolbox and wore the quiet competence of a man who knows how to fix things without making a lot of noise. "This is the one, Artie?" he asked, putting his weight on the board. It complained with a low, familiar sound. "That's the one," I said. "But I need you to look at a few other things, too. Up high." He didn't ask questions. He just followed me into the living room. I pointed to the smoke detector on the ceiling. "That one. It gives a clear view of the living room and the mantel." In the kitchen, I pointed to the small vent cover above the sink. "I want to see the table." In Eleanor's study, I showed him the bookshelf, a small gap between two thick encyclopedias. Sal opened his toolbox. Inside, nestled in foam, were 3 cameras no bigger than a quarter. Wireless, with a 6-month battery life. He worked in silence, his movements precise. A drill for a pilot hole, a quick connection, a seamless placement. No wires, no mess. "You sure about this?" he asked as he snapped the smoke detector cover back into place. It was the only time he spoke above a whisper. "I've never been more sure about anything," I said. "They think I can't see them, Sal. I'm just getting a new pair of glasses." When he left, the floorboard was silent, and my house had eyes. The days that followed my home became a silent movie theater, and I was the only one in the audience. Late at night, in the quiet of my bedroom, I would connect my phone to the secure feed and watch the recordings. The scenes played out one after another, each one another page in the ledger Eleanor had asked me to keep. The first clip was Brenda pacing the living room with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was a low, angry hiss. I don't know how much longer this is going to take. He's just sitting on it. No mark is being too soft. He still thinks he's dealing with his father. He's not. He's dealing with a roadblock. A roadblock. That's what I was to her. Not a father, not a grieving husband. Just a problem standing between her and the solution. The next was Leo 2 days later. He was on a business call, standing in the kitchen looking out at the lake with the posture of a king surveying his lands. "Look, don't worry about the capital," he said into his phone, his voice slick with confidence. "We'll have access to a significant new asset stream soon. Let's just say, family property is being liquidated. It's a sure thing." He spoke about the home his mother had loved as if it were a stock he was about to cash out. The pride in his voice was the sound of a man who had forgotten where he came from. But the last clip was the one that turned the coldness in my chest to ice. It was from Eleanor's study, time-stamped at 2 in the morning. The room was dark, lit only by the screen of a laptop they had opened on her desk. Brenda and Leo were moving through the room, not redecorating, but searching. They opened drawers. They riffled through files. "It has to be here," Brenda whispered. "The original will the account statements. Your mother was too meticulous to leave it all with some lawyer." "I don't like this, Bren." Leo's voice was thin, nervous. "This feels wrong." "What feels wrong," she shot back, "is living on a budget when all of this is just sitting here. Find it." I watched them violate my wife's sanctuary, their hands touching the things she had held, their whispers filling the space where she used to read. They were thieves in the house they hoped to inherit, and the walls, my walls, had been the only witnesses. But now the walls had eyes, and the eyes were mine. I had given them rope. For a full week I let them pull on it, let them feel its length, let them convince themselves it was a lifeline they were in control of. I documented it all. The phone calls that started with, "Just thinking of you," and ended with a question about my finances. The way Brenda would sigh with theatrical sadness whenever she passed Eleanor's study, as if the room itself were a burden. They were getting impatient. I could feel it in the tightening of their smiles, in the way their conversations would stop abruptly when I entered a room. The pressure wasn't just coming from me. Their own lives, built on a foundation of debt and appearances, were beginning to crack. I saw it happen on a Thursday afternoon. I was watching the live feed from the living room camera, the image clear on my phone screen. Leo was pacing back and forth in front of the fireplace, his phone pressed to his ear. His shoulders were tight, his voice a low, urgent murmur. "I understand they're getting impatient, Greg," he was saying. "No, I told you it's a sure thing. The paperwork is just being finalized. Give me until the end of the week." He hung up and slammed the phone down on the mantel. Brenda looked up from a magazine, her face a mask of cold fury. "That was the realtor," Leo said, his voice raw. "The buyer is threatening to walk. He wants a signed agreement by Friday or he's gone." Brenda stood up, tossing the magazine onto the couch. "And what did you tell him were excuses when I told you this gentle approach was a waste of time, Leo? He's never going to sign." "What do you want me to do, Bren?" Leo shot back, his voice rising. "He's my father. He's old. He's grieving. He needs time to process." "He's not processing, Leo. He's stalling," she snapped. "He's a stubborn old man sitting on a gold mine, and he's doing it to spite us. He enjoys watching you squirm. While we're drowning in debt from the lifestyle you promised me, he's in this paid-off house pretending he can't hear us." I watched the recording later that night, the sound of their argument tinny through my phone's speaker. They thought they were alone. They thought the walls were just wood and plaster. Stubborn. That was her word for a man who refused to hand over the keys, boss to his own life. The truth was, I wasn't being stubborn. I was being still, and my stillness was driving them mad. The camera recorded as she stepped closer to him, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We need to force his hand. If he won't sign that power of attorney willingly, then we find another way. We are not going to let him ruin this for us. I saved the video file, labeling it simply motivation. They were right about one thing. They did need to force my hand. But they had no idea that in doing so, they were about to hand me the final piece of evidence I needed. The final nail for a coffin they were building for themselves. It was Friday night, the night Leo's realtor had given them as a deadline. I watched the recording from the study camera the next morning, my coffee growing cold beside me. The footage was time-stamped at 11:17 p.m. The house was dark except for the single lamp on Eleanor's desk, casting long, menacing shadows across the room. They moved like thieves, their voices hushed conspiratorial. The video showed Brenda searching through the desk drawers, her movements quick and frustrated. It has to be something clean, she whispered. Something he signed before his hands got shaky. Leo stood by the door, his arms crossed, a silhouette of reluctance. Brenda, I don't know about this. This is a felony. Forgery. It's not a felony, Leo, it's a formality. She shot back without looking at him. Her hands paused, then lifted a small framed certificate from the wall. It was an award I'd received 20 years ago from the Builders Association for a community project I'd managed. At the bottom, in faded blue ink, was my signature. Arthur Hale, clear and strong. Here, she said, her voice sharp with discovery. She placed the frame on the desk under the lamp. Perfect. She took a piece of tracing paper from a drawer and laid it over the glass. With a pencil, she began to carefully trace my name, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. I watched her practice my life's signature, reducing it to a set of manageable curves and lines. See, she said after a moment, holding the paper up. The loop on the A, the way he lifts the pen after the R. I can do this. Brenda, just stop and think about this. Leo pleaded, his voice thin. If he finds out. She turned on him, then her eyes flashing in the lamplight. If he finds out, Leo, he is not going to find out. He's a confused old man who thinks the world is still the way it was in 1985. We are doing him a favor. We are taking a burden off his shoulders and putting it into an account that will secure our future. She walked over to him, placing her hands on his chest. Are you going to let him dictate the rest of our lives from a dusty old house, or are you going to be the man who takes control? He didn't answer. He just looked at the letter of intent she had laid out on the desk, its blank signature line waiting like an open grave. It's just a signature, Leo, she said, her voice softening into a silken blade. A placeholder, to keep the buyer from walking away. We'll get him to sign the real papers later. This just gets the ball rolling. For us. She handed him the pen. I watched my son's hand tremble as he took it. He looked from her face to the paper, a man caught between a weak conscience and a strong command. He sat down at his mother's desk in his mother's chair and hesitated. Brenda placed a firm hand on his shoulder. Sign it. The pen scratched across the paper. My name in my son's hand. He looked up when he was done, his face pale with a mixture of fear and relief. He had crossed the line. He had no idea I was the one who had drawn it in the sand, and that the camera was the tide recording everything before washing it all away. The email with the forged letter of intent arrived in Greg's inbox on Saturday morning. Greg wasn't just a realtor. He was a friend. He and Eleanor had served on the local library board together for a decade. He'd promised her over coffee one afternoon a year before she passed that he would always keep an eye on me. He opened the attachment, looked at the clumsy imitation of my signature, and a slow, cold anger settled in his gut. He didn't reply to Leo. Instead, he composed a new email, attached the forged document, and sent it to David Chen. The subject line was 2 words: as planned. The trap was now set. All I had to do was wait for them to walk into it. The following Tuesday afternoon, a courier's van pulled up to Leo and Brenda's sleek, modern condo. I watched it later on a video file Chen sent me, captured by the building's security camera. They were in their living room, celebrating. The footage was silent, but their body language was loud. Brenda held up a glass of champagne, her smile wide and triumphant. Leo clinked his glass against hers. They believed they had won. They thought their father's home, his life, was now just a matter of paperwork. Then the doorbell chimed. Leo answered, his smile faltering as he saw the uniformed courier. The courier said his name, Leo Hale, and handed him a stiff, formal legal envelope requesting a signature on his digital device. The confidence drained from Leo's face as he signed. He closed the door and stood for a moment, staring at the envelope as if it were a snake. I didn't have to be there to see the rest. I could picture the scene perfectly. Brenda walking over, her victorious smile turning to a frown of confusion. "What is that?" she would ask. He would tear it open, the sound of ripping paper unnaturally loud in their silent, minimalist living room. He would pull out the single sheet of heavy cream-colored paper, and he would read the words that Eleanor and Chen had crafted years ago, words designed to be a wall of ice. The letterhead would be the first blow: Chen and Associates, attorneys at law. This wasn't a friendly note. This was an official act. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Hale," the letter would begin, "you are hereby formally summoned to attend the official reading of the last will and testament of the late Eleanor Hale. The meeting will also address the terms and administration of the Hale Family Legacy Trust." I imagined Leo's eyes stumbling over that phrase. Family Legacy Trust. What was that? His confusion would curdle into fear. Brenda would snatch the letter from his hands, her own eyes scanning the page, searching for a loophole, an angle, and finding none. The letter would continue. "Attendance is mandatory. You are advised to attend with your legal counsel as matters of significant financial and legal consequence will be addressed. All prior discussions or informal agreements regarding the property at 125 Lakeside Drive are considered null and void pending this formal reading." That line would be the final killing stroke. Null and void. Their forged letter, their pressure, their entire plan erased by a single perfectly crafted sentence. They weren't being invited to a discussion. They were being summoned to a judgment. They were no longer the ones in control. For the first time, they were being told where to be and when. They thought they were being called to a meeting about an inheritance. They were wrong. They were being summoned to a reckoning. The conference room at Chen and Associates was a place built for finality. The long mahogany table was polished to a dark mirror, reflecting the gray, unforgiving light from the window. The air smelled of old paper and quiet, expensive authority. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat with my back to the city, facing the door. The storm I had been weathering for months was no longer inside me. It was about to break in this room, and I was simply a witness. Leo walked in a half-step ahead of his wife, a weak attempt to claim the territory. He wore a suit that was meant to look powerful, but his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping under his skin. He avoided my eyes, choosing instead to focus on a meaningless print on the far wall. He was a man rehearsing a role he no longer believed in. Brenda followed him, a portrait of polished indignation. She sat with her back ramrod straight, placing her designer purse on the table like a shield. Her smile was a thin, brittle line, a weapon she was determined to use even though she knew it was out of ammunition. Their lawyer, a younger man whose name I had already forgotten, arranged a yellow legal pad and a pen in front of him, with practiced neutrality. He was a hired gun here to absorb the first volley, his face a mask of professional calm. The only sound in the room was the quiet hum of the city 10 floors below, and the scratching of his pen on the notepad. It was the quiet before a verdict, thick with everything that had not been said. I placed my hands flat on the cool surface of the table and waited. I did not feel anger or grief. I felt the steady, calm weight of a decision made long ago. Mr. Chen entered the room, closing the door behind him with a soft, definitive click. He carried a single blue folder. He didn't smile. He simply nodded to us all and took his seat at the head of the table. The performance was over. The reading was about to begin. Mr. Chen cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tense silence. He opened the blue folder and adjusted his glasses. We are gathered to read the last will and testament of Eleanor Hale, dated March 12, 2024. He began with the small things, the expected gestures of a life neatly concluded. To her sister, Eleanor left her collection of antique gardening books. To the local library, a modest cash donation. To our longtime neighbor Joyce, she left her favorite porcelain teapot. I watched Leo and Brenda across the table. They were exchanging small, impatient glances. This was the boring part for them, the sentimental clutter they had to sit through before the real business began. Brenda tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the table's edge, a tiny, repetitive sound of greed, waiting for its turn. Leo shifted in his chair, straightening his tie as if preparing for an announcement in his favor. They thought they knew what was coming. They believed the house and the bulk of the estate would be a simple matter, a direct inheritance to be divided. Then Mr. Chen set aside the first page. That concludes the specific bequests of personal effects, he said, his tone shifting almost imperceptibly. We now move to the primary asset distribution, which is governed by the Hale Family Legacy Trust, established by Mrs. Hale 3 years ago. The name landed on the table with a quiet thud. I saw a flicker of confusion in Leo's eyes. He glanced at Brenda, who gave a slight, almost invisible shake of her head. Their lawyer leaned forward, his pen suddenly still. The Hale Family Legacy Trust, he asked, unable to keep the surprise from his voice. Correct, Mr. Chen said, not looking at him, but at the document. The trust holds the majority of Mrs. Hale's and Mr. Hale's joint assets, including all investment portfolios and the real property at 125 Lakeside Drive. He paused, letting the scope of it settle in the room. As per the terms of the trust, all decisions regarding the administration and distribution of these assets are left to the sole discretion of the designated executor and trustee. Brenda's mask of composure began to crack. I could see the muscles in her jaw tighten. And who is the executor? She asked, her voice a shade too sharp. Mr. Chen looked up from the page, his gaze moving past them to settle on me. Your wife was very clear on this point. The sole unchallengeable executor of the Hale Family Legacy Trust is her husband, Arthur Hale. Mr. Chen let the weight of his last words settle in the room. I watched the color drain from Leo's face. Brenda's hand, which had been tapping impatiently on the table, went still. Their lawyer cleared his throat, a small nervous sound in the heavy silence. My clients are, of course, the primary beneficiaries, he began, but his voice trailed off as Mr. Chen slowly turned a page. As the sole executor, Arthur is bound by the terms of the trust. Mr. Chen stated, his voice calm and level. Specifically, Article 4, Section B. He adjusted his glasses and read directly from the document. The provisional inheritance for Leo Hale and Brenda Hale is contingent upon their conduct in the 12 months following the passing of the grantor. They must demonstrate consistent respect, love, and support for Arthur Hale, and must not engage in any coercive action, financial or otherwise intended, to unduly influence their father's decisions regarding his assets or living situation. He looked up. Eleanor was very specific. She also required Arthur to keep a log. He reached to his side and placed a simple leather-bound notebook on the table. My ledger. Entry 1, Mr. Chen said, his voice cutting through the room. March 15th, 3 days after the funeral. Brenda Hale, in conversation with her husband, was recorded stating the following. He pressed a button on a small digital player. Brenda's own voice, clear and triumphant, filled the silent room. This day feels like a holiday. Everything is about to change. Brenda recoiled as if she'd been struck. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Leo stared at the player as if it were a venomous snake. Mr. Chen continued, turning a page in my ledger. Entry 12, April 10th. Leo Hale presented his father with this power of attorney document. He slid a crystal-clear photograph of the document across the polished table. He framed it as a tool to help manage things for you. The video of this conversation is, of course, available. Their lawyer put a hand up as if to stop the onslaught. This is an invasion of... This, Mr. Chen interrupted, his voice hardening for the first time, is an executor fulfilling his fiduciary duty to document coercion as required by the trust. He then turned a laptop on the table to face them. And finally, entry 17, April 15th, in the deceased's study. The video began to play. It was silent at first. The grainy night vision footage showed Brenda tracing my signature. It showed her guiding Leo's hand. Then Mr. Chen unmuted the audio. Brenda's whisper filled the room. It's not a felony, Leo. It's a formality. Sign it. The scratch of the pen on the paper was the only sound. I watched my son forge my name. When the video ended, the silence in the room was absolute. Brenda was pale, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Leo was frozen, a statue of a man, his eyes wide and vacant. Mr. Chen closed my ledger. As executor, and having reviewed this and other evidence, Arthur has made his decision regarding the clear and profound violation of Article 4, Section B. He looked directly at Leo, then at Brenda. Your provisional inheritance from the Hale Family Legacy Trust is hereby and irrevocably reduced to the legal minimum required to prevent a contest of the will. $1 each. A choked sob escaped Brenda's throat. No, she whispered. No, you can't. She looked at Leo, her eyes wild. He can't do this, Leo, tell them. But Leo didn't move. He just stared at the blank screen of the laptop. Brenda shoved her chair back, the legs screeching against the floor, and ran from the room, her cries echoing down the marble hallway. Mr. Chen waited for the sound to fade. Then he delivered the final blow. He looked at their lawyer, his voice now devoid of all warmth. There is one final matter. The evidence of felony forgery documented on this recording leaves my client and this firm with a legal and ethical obligation. He tapped the laptop. A full copy of this evidence file is being messengered to the Travis County District Attorney's Office this afternoon. Their lawyer's face went slack. Leo finally seemed to break, slumping in his chair, his head in his hands. I had not said a word. My power had been in my patience, in Eleanor's planning. I stood up. I didn't look at my son. I simply picked up my leather-bound ledger from the table. I gave a single formal nod to Mr. Chen, a sign of a contract fulfilled. Then I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the wreckage of their greed behind me. I walked down the long, quiet hallway, my footsteps echoing on the marble. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of the building and stepped out into the bright, indifferent sunlight. My face was calm. There was no victory in it, no anger, just the quiet, solid feeling of a foundation finally set right. This story is a powerful reminder that love and kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. True family is built on respect, not entitlement. When those lines are crossed, setting firm, undeniable boundaries is not an act of revenge, but a necessary act of self-preservation and honoring one's legacy. For more stories where the underestimated find their strength and justice is served, be sure to subscribe to the channel.